Hey friends, what's up? Ash here, welcome back to Gents. Hope that you guys are doing well. Today I've got for you a complete guide to cologne for idiots. Or beginners. Beginners sounds better. Beginners.
What a noob.
So I actually saw that FP Fragrances had done a guide kind of similar to this. I've got a link in the description to his channel. Feel free to check him out. He's got a big following on TikTok, also makes videos on YouTube about fragrances. And in today's video, I'm gonna give you just kind of a complete overview of everything you need to know when it comes to fragrances. I've done guides in the past, both line guides, as in like complete buying guides for specific lines of fragrances, also guides on like how you should spray fragrances on, just everything in general. But I'm taking a lot of that and just condensing it into one video here. Like I said, this is gonna be a high-level overview. So I'm not gonna go really deep into each one of these topics, or else this would be like an hour long. Before we dive into the first topic, the first thing you need to know about though, here are some codes you can use to save money across different fragrance websites. So each one of these sites carries fragrances, whether we're talking niche, designer, indie, or clone fragrances, and you can use each one of these codes to save yourself money across those sites. All right, let's get started. The first thing you need to know about when it comes to fragrances is concentrations. Now, typically, what you're gonna see when it comes to concentrations in terms of men's fragrances is eau de toilette, eau de parfum, parfum, and extrait de parfum. So those are gonna be the most common concentrations. There are other concentrations though, like if you go below eau de toilette, you have eau de cologne, below that you have eau fraîche, but you don't typically see those concentrations. It's usually EDT, EDP, P, or EDP again, extrait de parfum, which they'll just say extrait for those. And you can search up concentrations. Like right here, you can see the different typical percentages per concentration, but those are not really set in stone. Because depending on where you look, you may see concentration for like parfum, for example, and then you look on another website and it will say, well, actually that concentration would be an extrait de parfum. So it's not necessarily something that's set in stone by law, like this is this and this is this, but that gives you an idea of what the concentrations are. And that's gonna be the concentration of the fragrance oil versus the amount of carrier that's in the fragrance. So the carrier that's more typically used for fragrances is going to be perfumer's alcohol, but you can find some fragrances like, for example, Sauvage Eau Forte that will use something different. But for 99% of fragrances out there, that's what it's gonna be. Okay, so that's the overall concentration, right? What does that mean as far as performance? Well, it actually depends. It depends. There are fragrances that actually project better that have a lower concentration. A lot of times, not always, but a lot of times, higher concentrations will actually sit a little bit closer to the skin. So for example, Sauvage Eau de Toilette. That fragrance actually projects a little bit better than Sauvage Parfum. But in generalities, if you have a fragrance that's higher concentration, it does typically linger a little bit longer, so it's gonna have a little better longevity typically. And most of the time, people would think of eau de toilette fragrances as being a little bit fresher, and then as you go up higher in concentration value, the fragrance would get a little bit deeper, a little bit richer, just have overall more of a full scent profile. But if somebody tells you that 100% of the time, the eau de parfum projects better and lasts longer than the eau de toilette, and then the parfum is better than the eau de parfum and parfum, they don't know what they're talking about.
This is beyond me.
It really is dependent on each particular fragrance and what is inside of those fragrances. Because if we're talking different lines of fragrances, you can have something like Spice Bomb Dark Leather and compare that to, again, Sauvage Eau de Toilette. Sauvage lasts longer than Dark Leather. It projects harder than Dark Leather. It really depends on what makes the fragrance up. But those are your concentrations, and typically at full retail price, the higher the concentration, the more expensive the fragrance within the line. So for example, Bleu de Chanel Eau de Toilette is the most affordable. Eau de Parfum, a little more expensive than that. Parfum, the most expensive. And since we're talking price, let's talk where you should buy fragrances. Where most people buy fragrances, at least the people that are really into fragrances, is at discounters. And that's because you can save a lot of money buying fragrances at discounters versus full retail. Now, if money is no object, no issue, feel free to buy everything at full retail. You know, Macy's, Sephora, Ulta in the US, Those are some of the big ones. But if you buy something full retail, you know for sure that it's okay, that it's good, that it came directly from the manufacturer. With discounters, you want to buy from discounters that have been around a long time, that are trusted, that people know are selling legitimate product. If you want to go into more detail about where discounters get their fragrances, all you have to look up is gray market. Fragrance gray market. Just Google that. Read to your heart's content. And actually the way it goes for a lot of brands nowadays is there's particular wholesalers who are selling into the big discounters, so you don't have to worry at all about the product being fake. In the US, the biggest discounters are going to be JOMASHOP, which also carries like watches and clothing and sunglasses and a bunch of other stuff. But JOMASHOP is a legitimate discounter, and actually a lot of niche brands just sell directly to JOMASHOP. So basically the same people that are selling into Macy's and places like that are also selling directly to JOMASHOP, who's then selling it to you at a discount. But anyway, JOMASHOP, Fragrance Net has been a really big one for a long time. They have lost some ground to other discounters that have better prices and better service, but they're still a really big one. FragranceBuy.ca and Fragflex.com, both of those are from Canada, but they ship to the US very quickly, and a lot of times they have better prices. The PerfumeBox.com, which also carries a lot of cologne fragrances. Beauty House is a new one, and actually I've noticed a lot of times that Beauty House has fragrances, very popular designer fragrances, that are sold out at the other discounters, so they're worth checking for that. But those are 5 really big ones. If you're in Europe, Notino is really big. It used to be huge in the US, but it left the US market. But Notino has a lot of different countries covered in Europe. They're a really big discounter, probably the biggest European discounter if we're talking about just how widespread they are. And those are typically the places you want to shop, discounters, because you're gonna save a huge amount of money compared to full retail. And then you have some websites like maxaroma.com who focus a little more on niche brands, but also have designers and sometimes clones. And they will sometimes have bigger discounts on some of the niche stuff they carry than the other discounters I talked about. And they also have codes like the one I showed you earlier that you can use to save even more money. Now, where would you spray the fragrances you buy? Well, that kind of depends. A lot of people like to spray at different places. That sounds weird. I'm not talking about, okay, normal places. But yeah, it really depends on where you like to spray. For me personally, I like to spray here in the crook of my elbow, sometimes here in my clavicle, my collarbone, right here on the back part of my neck, sometimes behind my ear. Other people will like to spray up here on the shoulders or even behind the knee. The idea there is that as you move around, you know, you're moving your body, it's helping diffuse that fragrance, helping get it out into the air a little bit, having a nice scent cloud go on. And also those are some different pulse points. You know, that's the whole thing. People are always like, spray your pulse points. Does that help? I mean, maybe a little bit, yeah, but it's not like a night and day difference. It's not gonna be one of those things where I spray here and then you catch like huge whiffs, but then if I spray just right here, oh, nobody can smell it. It doesn't really work that way. But it is one of those things where, you know, you're constantly kind of moving those different spots that I talked about. And as you do that, like I said, it helps push that fragrance off a little. You can also spray on your clothing. You can spray into your hair if you want a fragrance to have a little more longevity, because it will stick a little longer if you spray onto clothing. You have to be aware though of what fragrance you're spraying on, because some of them will stain. You don't want that. Also, some of those fragrances last an eternity on clothing. So if you spray it on and you don't wash your clothes right away, you know, that's gonna stick there forever. For some people, that's good. For other people, they're not gonna like that. There is a big thing where people say don't rub the fragrance together. I don't do that. I know most people that are really into fragrances don't do that. The whole issue with it was people said it bruised the molecules, which it doesn't really like destroy the molecules, but in general, it's bad practice, and most people are gonna go, you know, shame you for it, so I wouldn't do that. All right, let's talk types of fragrances, because you're gonna hear this a lot. Blue fragrances, date night fragrances, oud fragrances, office fragrances, sweet fragrances, all that stuff, right? Let's talk blue first, blue fragrances. So this is a little self-explanatory once you've heard it and smelled a couple fragrances, but blue fragrances, basically Typically that means something that's very versatile, easy to wear, compliment pulling, mass appealing, made for practically year-round use. A lot of times they have kind of a modern woodsy dry down, a modern woodsy base. A lot of times off the top it'll be like ginger and citrus, sometimes apple and fresh spices, but they're made generally just to be worn as much as possible, to sell as many bottles as possible. And when you've smelled a number of different blue fragrances, you get kind of the idea. So some examples are going to be Bleu de Chanel from Chanel, Sauvage from Dior, the Y line from Yves Saint Laurent, L'Homme Rocus, Versace Dylan Blue, Dolce & Gabbana K, Missoni Parfum, which that one does not come in a blue bottle. It doesn't have to come in a blue bottle to be a blue fragrance, but Missoni Parfum, that one smells similar to Bleu de Chanel. So fragrances of that style, those are gonna be blue fragrances. Date night fragrances typically are gonna be warm, sweet fragrances, sexy, cozy, alluring, intoxicating. You'll hear them described like that. Stuff like Dolce & Gabbana's The One Eau de Parfum, La Nuit de l'Homme, possibly The Most Wanted, things like that. Office fragrances are gonna be a little classier, cleaner, a little bit less in your face. Some of the more popular ones are like Prada L'Homme, Grey Vetiver from Tom Ford, stuff like that. So those are some ways that you hear fragrances described as like different families, but in actuality there are 4 generally accepted families of fragrances right now, which are fresh, floral, amber, and woody. So those are the 4 types, but in the past you also had fougere and oriental as different ways to describe fragrance families. Those have kind of fallen out of fashion a little bit as far as how much they're used in terms of descriptions anyway, with the whole family system, which I don't necessarily, lump everything into families like that, but you may hear that. Also leather. Leather was one that was used as well. And those are pretty self-explanatory. Fresh, floral, amber, woody, right? Let's talk sillage, projection, longevity. It's pretty self-explanatory, but sometimes it can get confusing. So longevity is how long the fragrance stays on your skin. So if somebody says it has 6 hours longevity, that's how long it would last on your skin, where you can pick the fragrance up. Sillage and projection sometimes get confused, right? Somebody will say sillage when they actually mean projection, or the other way. Sillage is essentially your scent trail. So as you are moving around, the wake that you leave behind you, the scent trail, that is your sillage. Projection is, if you're just standing here, how far that projects, that's your projection. So you could have something that projects very heavily, but it doesn't have as much of a sillage depending on what type of fragrance it is. Or you could have something that's a beast in both, projection and sillage. Let's talk top, mid, and base, because I have actually gotten a number of emails asking me about this. So anytime you look up a note breakdown for a fragrance, there'll be top notes, mid notes, base notes, right? The top notes are generally the notes that you're gonna smell first, the ones off the top. A lot of the time that's gonna be like ginger, citrus, fruity notes. Sometimes you'll have like pink pepper and different things like that off the top. But those are notes that are a little bit more fleeting, a little bit more volatile, and those are the first ones that you will typically pick up. So when you see those in the top in a note breakdown, that's what those are. The mid notes are what you would expect. Those are the fragrances that are kind of in between the top and the base notes. And a lot of times those will be like lavender, geranium, different things like that, maybe jasmine. Sometimes you'll see notes that you would think of as being a little bit heavier in the mid, like you might see vanilla there, sometimes woody notes as well. But those are the ones that you smell after the top. A lot of times they kind of meld together with the top notes and then transition into the base. And the base notes are the ones that linger the longest. So those are typically gonna be like vanilla, ambers, resins, woods, ambergris, musk, ambroxan, amberwoods, things like that. So those are the ones that last the longest, and after the fragrance has been on your skin for quite a while, those are typically the ones that you're gonna smell the most of. So that's top, mid, base. Let's talk fragrance compliments, because that's one of the things everybody wants, compliments. When it comes to compliments, you will typically receive compliments from people you know. That's just the way it is. You already have a relationship with that person, whether it's somebody you work with, somebody you go to school with, somebody you're dating, somebody in your family, an acquaintance, whatever. You will usually get way more compliments from that type of person than anybody else. That's not to say that compliments from strangers do not happen, because they do, but a lot goes into that. Like, if you don't get out of your house very often, you're not gonna get any compliments, right? If you're not doing a lot of different things in public settings, you're not gonna get any compliments. If you're in more social settings more often, where people are talking freely and stuff, more likely to get a compliment. Fragrances are not something where you spray it on, and even if it's a super popular fragrance everybody loves, you're not gonna have people rushing you to be like, oh, what is that? You know, that typically does not happen. And you also have to be approachable. Like, if you're coming across really salty or angry looking or whatever, you're probably not gonna have many people come up and ask you what you're wearing. It's kind of like your clothing, your shoes, a watch, something like that. You know, you could wear really fantastic looking clothes. You could have a great new pair of shoes, whatever, like I said, a watch, other things. And you could go in social settings a lot of times and have people say nothing. Same thing with fragrances. Other times it'll be just like something's clicking and you get asked 3-4 times in one day. It's just how it is. So basically the best thing you can do is make sure that you're out and about, make sure you're approachable, make sure you're well put together, you know, don't go out looking like you just rolled out of bed type thing. I know that's very simple, like common sense, but that's just how it is. And last, let's talk about how you should build your wardrobe, your fragrance wardrobe. For a lot of people, if you have never smelled a wide range of fragrances, then a lot of stuff is gonna be new to you, very new. And one of the best things you can do is actually go to somewhere where you can smell lots of different things. Like if you're interested in a bunch of different fragrances, go to a store, if you have one nearby, that has testers, and try things that seem interesting to you. See what works for you, see what doesn't. Try to find commonalities there. And then you'll start to develop your own personal taste as you smell more things and experience more things. Also, of course, the safest thing to do is to sample first. Like I just said, go into a store. You can also order samples online through places like eBay, like carded samples, things like that. If you do blind buy, again, discounters are gonna save you a little money, so at least if you get something you don't like, you didn't spend quite as much. But what most people wanna look for initially is fragrances they're actually going to wear. Because I know a lot of times, if you're just getting into fragrances, you'll hear about stuff like Dior Homme Intense or Lalique Encre Noir, things like this. Masterpiece fragrances, and you'll be like, well, I gotta get that. Then you get it in and you go, I'm never gonna wear it. It makes more sense to have fragrances you'll actually wear, even if they're considered more generic. Because what good is having 10 masterpiece fragrances if you never wear them? There's no point. So go after stuff that you can actually wear, typically things that are more versatile. So again, those blue fragrances I mentioned before, stuff like that is really good to jump off with. Then you can start branching off from there. Maybe try out the Le Male line from Jean Paul Gaultier, or the Le Beau line, or the Scandal line from the same house, Stronger With You, The Most Wanted. You can start trying to check out some of the 1 million fragrances, like 1 Million Lucky. And from there, you can start getting into specific seasonal fragrances. So the first thing I would do is get some versatile stuff you can wear all year, daytime or nighttime. From there, you can start, like I said, branching out to different seasons, because something you wear in winter or fall is gonna be a little heavier, sweeter typically, warmer, richer, spicier. And then in spring, you're gonna have something that's probably a little more green and fresh, but has a bit more body to it. And then typically in summer, you're going for your fresh aquatic fragrances, citrusy fragrances, stuff like that. So you can start branching out and start to get more specific stuff once you have fragrances that you feel comfortable with wearing whenever you want. That's what I would do. As far as niche fragrances, you can start getting into those as time goes on, but do understand they're much more expensive. A lot of the times niche fragrances are, as the name would say, niche, so they're not going to be as easily worn as most designer fragrances. That's just the name of the game. As far as affordable brands that you can start checking out as far as niche fragrances go, I'd say Mancera is at the top of the list, because a lot of times at discounters they're just as cheap as designers. And maybe Nishane would be a good one to check out, stuff like Ani or Hasavat. Diptyque actually has really good quality fragrances that are not too expensive even at full retail. And of course Parfums de Marly, which is like the go-to for most people when they start getting into niche. Them and Creed. So there we go, guys. A guide to get you started. If you know nothing, that at least gives you a little bit of knowledge. And then from there, you can start branching out, looking at this, looking at that, looking at the other thing. Thank you guys for hanging with me. Stay safe out there. I'll see you tomorrow with another fragrance video. See you guys.